So how do you solve a problem like Kim Jong-un? And the question is, it's incredibly difficult because there is no easy answer. Because even if, for example, you say you finally get the coalition of the countries that generally need to sort this out, of US, China and Russia, all these countries face huge problems. And North Korea at the moment, one of their big aces in the hole is the fact that none of these countries are willing to commit to something because they are all very much split on, what to do and what is, a solution. You've got Russia and China, who both share a land border with North Korea. And in any event of the regime falling or, North Korea essentially falling, which, any solution would lead to the fall of it, would happen, was that you would get a mass of refugees flooding across the border in unprecedented numbers. Like, you wouldn't have seen this probably amount of refugee movement probably since the First World War. And the amount of actual general destruction will be probably about the same that you would probably have seen happen to cities during the Second World War. So this is how destructive a campaign this would actually be. So one of the big problems is Seoul. North Korea have said multiple times, and as we've seen from satellite imagery, there are hundreds of thousands of artillery pieces, missiles pointed at North Korea, and those are the ones that we can see. There are hundreds of possibly thousands probably hidden away as well. So literally short of something, two things that could essentially try and be happen. One that's absolutely impossible is that America somehow manages to create some sort of defense system that can somehow either completely defend Seoul or minimize the damage to Seoul. Unless they can come up with that, it's not going to happen. And something, you're literally talking something very futuristic, something short of an energy shield to be able to defend Seoul. Now that's completely an outlandish idea, I agree, but how do you defend a city against what would essentially be an absolute deluge of weaponry? Seoul will be reduced to absolute rubble, and if you've seen the pictures of the cities in Syria that have been been laid waste to, that's exactly the same what would happen to Seoul, and the amount of civilian life lost in that alone would be catastrophic. So that is one massive thing that North Korea has. I saw it, I think it was one of the two US generals they had, and they both pretty much agreed that in the first hour to 45 minutes, Seoul would be almost obliterated with any war with North Korea. In fact, I'll go through what they said because it's rather interesting. So you would essentially have that first 45 minutes. Now they also said that the North Korean army only has enough supplies for 3 weeks worth of campaigning. So that means North Korea in 3 months, 3 weeks, would have to completely take South Korea. Now bear in mind, you've got the South Korean military. We don't know generally how they would perform, but North Korea is the fourth, I think it's the fourth or third largest army in the world. So that is a lot of troops and equipment coming flying at the South Koreans. So potentially, America would be doing aerial bombardment in an attempt to try and slow them down, as would any American ground troops. So the next stage would be that in 3 days, the closest American bases, it would take them 3 days to load their equipment onto ships, and then get to South Korea. It would then take 3 weeks, exactly, they said this themselves, 3 weeks to get the heavy armour from Texas to bring it over to North Korea. Now at that point, you would literally have a shift probably in the war, with America bringing in their heavy equipment. You have North Korea literally on the verge of running out, but you have potentially them having access to South Korea materials and supplies that they may have captured, definitely having to live off the land. There would be an absolute, turning of the war, and then you have the literally question of, once the war starts to go against North Korea, Kim Jong-un literally has nothing to lose by launching a nuke or setting off a nuclear bomb and taking thousands of Americans with him. So even then, in that situation, if you went with a war land-based scenario, you've still got nuclear weapons to worry about. So this is still a completely unanswerable question, but one of the things that I certainly see possible as a solution is that you need to get America, Russia, and China on the same page. Sanctions are literally have gotten to a point where it's not working. Now, a lot of people have said, you need to get China involved to completely cut them off. But China's not going to do that, because at that point, everything in North Korea would fall apart, and you'd get that mass influx of refugees into China. Now, if you wanted China to do that, you would have to give them guarantees that you would come in and help with that situation. And that would probably take something like the UN going, okay, we're going to help out you with that. We're going to provide with mass humanitarian aid. But we are talking humanitarian aid on a scale probably unseen before. That's how bad it generally, a lot of analysts have put it. And even then, if you went with that and finally got China on board to do that, and let's say, they didn't, but let's say they agreed to, all these three parties then agreed, okay, we need to do a first strike capability. Let's wipe out his, nuclear facilities, launching facilities. You've still got the potential of, North Korea retaliation. However, if you get all three of these countries to perform a first strike, North Korea is then put in a situation of, well, who do we strike at? And if we strike at someone, we then risk the ire of all these three countries closing in on us. So it's a situation where they potentially would not survive. But again, you have that situation of, would the regime be so desperate that they'd just be like, well, we'll just launch nuclear missiles, we've got nothing else left to lose. So it's an absolute no-win situation, or even if, there is a win situation, but none of the wins, shall we say, are, zero casualties. There will be absolute chaos, mass loss of life, unbelievable destruction that we haven't seen, again, since the Second World War. So, and having someone like Donald Trump currently at the head of the US is absolutely ridiculous, because this is a guy who has absolutely no idea what he is doing. He gave North Korea a massive PR boost when he said, oh, nothing but fire and fury, and Kim Jong-un has called his bluff. He's called Trump's bluff completely. So now Trump looks like he's a massive blowhard, and that every time Kim Jong-un does something like launches a missile or something like that, well, Trump's just going to talk big. We can get a massive propaganda reel in our country of Trump saying stuff, and then we don't have to worry about any consequences, because we know he's not going to do anything to us. So, congratulations, Trump, on that, because you completely scuppered any chance there of actually being able to do something with, North Korea. But, there you go. That's the current situation with North Korea. It's an absolute mess and would be an absolute omnishambles of a war, potentially. It would result in a North Korean loss ultimately, but a loss for South Korea, possibly surrounding possibly Japan. You're looking at Guam. They might have capabilities to launch at the US itself. It's just an unfortunate unknown, and it will be absolute chaos. There's no other better way to put it. But it's a situation where you have to go, well, do we need to do something, or can we just go, we're just going to leave them alone? We're just going to, impose the tightest sanctions we literally can on them, and we just let the regime continue on. But at what cost do you let that regime continue on? Because you never know when they might do something incredibly stupid. So that's literally the situation in North Korea. It's not good. Nothing, potentially good will come from it, and mass loss of human life. I'm repeating myself, but a lot of people don't seem to understand that situation of particularly what could happen to South Korea in that situation, and the civilian population in particular of Seoul would almost be wiped out. So what do you I'd be interested to see what other people think about this, and what's your opinion on this. Is it worth going for a first strike? Should America just strike alone? Does China need to put on more pressure, and does for example the UN need to commit to a massive humanitarian aid operation in the event of the collapse of North Korea? So what do you think, essentially? Let me know.